Hey, Godfather of Anxiety here. Just wanted to make a short video about overcoming guilt when it comes to anxiety and depression. I don't hear this talked about a lot, and in my research, I haven't seen a ton written about it, but I'm going to be discussing basically two different types of guilt that you might feel when you have anxiety spectrum conditions. The first one that I'm going to cover is the one that's related to obsessive compulsive disorder, intrusive thoughts, etc. So that type of guilt, you may feel terribly guilty about some of the intrusive thoughts you've had, even though you've never acted on anything like that and you're not choosing to think about that. It's playing on a loop. This may cause tremendous guilt. You also might even actually feel like a need to confess, which is another terrible thing that goes on when you have intrusive thoughts and obsessive compulsive disorder. Another type of guilt that you can have when you have obsessive compulsive disorder is guilt for not doing things perfectly or according to your OCD. And a lot of the time, you'd be shocked at how terrible, how guilty you can feel if somebody with OCD feels as though they didn't do something the way they were supposed to. You know, I know people that microscopic dent on a refrigerator, on the back of a refrigerator that no one will ever see, that would cause them weeks of angst because of their obsessive compulsive disorder. There is not any logic to OCD. It's not logical. That's why we call it magical thinking, right? Because we think that we're in control of things we're not in control of. And then when things go wrong or we don't complete the task the way that we, have it conjured up in our mind a certain way, we can feel excessive guilt because of this. And a lot of the time what will happen is with people with obsessive compulsive disorder, they'll give up. It's all or nothing. They don't do it the way that they think it should have been done, that they're done with it. And this is really debilitating, right? Because we're imperfect human beings. We don't do anything perfectly. And we know this if we're using our logical mind, but with obsessive compulsive disorder, very infrequently are we using our logical mind. And again, to reiterate, those intrusive thoughts, and this is really where I was at, about a year and a half after I started having anxiety disorder, those intrusive thoughts will make you feel so guilty. I mean, you'll feel like confessing to everything. You just feel, I remember the most frequent question I would ask was, am I a good person? Do you think I'm a good person? So you're feeling, incredibly guilty about thoughts that I promise you're not in control of, other than the fact that it's coming from your brain, right? But they play on a loop. And if anything, they are the thoughts that you would never think of normally, that you would always keep out of your mind. They're things that bother you immensely. They can have to do with violence or sex or whatever, germs, whatever repulses you the most is the kind of thing that is going to play on a loop when you have intrusive thought, OCD. And you'd be shocked at how much guilt you can feel for having these thoughts playing on a loop. I mean, people think all kinds of crazy things, guys. They think they're evil. They think they're possessed. They think terrible things because of this. And it's just playing on a loop. And it has nothing to do with your desires or what you want. It has more to do with keeping you in a state of anxiousness. And again, in some strange attempt by your mind at control. But I won't get too deep into that in this video. So this type of guilt, I'll cover right now the things that you need to do to get over this type of guilt? Well, first of all, get your OCD treated. Get it treated. This could involve medication. Sometimes medication is not that effective for OCD. Sometimes you're going to have to do cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy. And a big part of that is labeling it as OCD and then letting it play. With intrusive thoughts, it doesn't matter how crazy it is, if it's some horrible act of violence or murder, just let it play, label it as OCD with your logical mind, and continue on with your life. This is not easy. This is extremely difficult. But that is the way that you overcome obsessive compulsive disorder and intrusive thoughts. Another thing, just learn to use your logical mind when assessing blame. It's so hard for us when we have any of these anxiety spectrum conditions to get a hold of ourselves to the point where we can use logic on something. And if you're feeling terrible about thoughts that are running through your head, what does that tell you? There's nothing to feel guilty about. Another thing that we can reason with ourselves on is thoughts are not actions. We will be assessed by others, by our actions, not by what we wish to do. Intentions are not going to, good or bad, are not going to be how people remember us. So don't worry about that horrible movie that's playing in your head. Let it play. It's nothing to feel guilty about. You don't feel guilty if you get cancer. You don't feel guilty if you break your leg. I mean, obviously, depending on the circumstances, but you don't feel guilty about that. So this is a medical condition. So don't internalize this as something personal. Label it as OCD and let it just play in your mind on a loop. And the less you react to intrusive thoughts, the less you react to not doing something a specific way, right? The less power those thoughts will have, those compulsions will have. It's not easy. Again, I'm not trying to minimize how ridiculously difficult it is for somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder to overcome it. You will have to fight, the urge to do your compulsions. But as soon as you do that, in whatever crazy thing you thought you were controlling or wasn't going to happen or was going to happen, when you don't follow through with your compulsion and you realize that had no control on it, no bearing, this will really help you start to get better. And it'll help you not feel guilty. That's how you're going to not feel guilty about not doing a compulsion. Because once you realize the compulsion is futile and has nothing to do with actual control or keeping a bad thing from happening, once your logical mind takes over, you won't feel the associated guilt. So anyways, I probably dwelled on that a little too long, but that's the first type of guilt I wanted to discuss. The next type of guilt I want to discuss is the guilt that you're going to have with anxiety and depression, with what you're not doing, what things that you used to do that you're not able to do anymore, or things that you maybe have started doing because of anxiety and depression. And it's a really important thing during the recovery process to let your guilt, let it go after you've dealt with it. As you start to recover, for instance, maybe you haven't been a good husband. Maybe you haven't been a good father. Maybe you haven't been a good mother, a good wife, whatever, a good friend. Whatever it is, As you recover, if you need to have a talk with that person to apologize, as you start to feel more like yourself again, go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that. But the best apology you can give the people that you've affected with your inaction and your actions that have gone on because you've been horribly clinically depressed or horribly anxious is by returning to the person that they remember, that the person that they married, the person that was their parent or their sibling or whatever the case. That's the best way to apologize, is again through our actions. And holding on to guilt will inhibit this process. It will not help. Again, if you have to have a talk with them and say, and I know I did with my wife, we've had several conversations, about how sorry I am for the way that my illness affected the family, but again, the best way to get through that is to start resuming your normal activities and acting like yourself, returning to normal. That is going to be what mends the fences with anyone you've hurt. That's what's going to make you feel good enough about yourself and start building your self-esteem back up. And, I did a whole video on building up your self-esteem because that's another thing that takes a huge hit, right? And a lot of that is because of the guilt that you feel. I feel terrible because it was actually about 6 years that I was not a good husband, a good father, a good provider. I managed to keep employment, but, nothing in my life was I doing the way that I normally would. And I was a shell of myself. And it affected my children. It affected my wife. And yeah, I did have to apologize to her, and I did. But, I was very fortunate to have married somebody who actually understands what love is. And that if you care about somebody and you see them going through something, this is where you have to try to empathize. Look at somebody you care about. Now, if you saw them going through a mental health condition, if you saw them going through, and just not acting like themselves because of it, they're not getting out of bed, they're so depressed, they're having a hard time going to work, their weight is getting out of control because they aren't exercising, they're not doing any of the things they normally did. Well, would you just immediately go, oh, they don't care, I'm moving on? If you really love somebody, that's not what's going to happen. You're going to try to get to the bottom of it. What's going on? Figure it out. And you will help the person through it. And this is, you have to be that person, but be it to yourself. You have to remember and be, again, just like when I mentioned the other type of guilt, measure yourself with your logical mind. If you had some other serious illness and you weren't able to carry out all of your responsibilities and be as attentive as a husband, father, wife, mother as you want to be, or an employee, would that be something that, you would feel horribly guilty about? I mean, listen, and let me explain this too before I wrap up the video. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that guilt doesn't have a place. Because guilt can be a tremendous motivator to get us to adhere more closely to our values and our morals. So that's not the case at all. But what I am saying is when you carry around guilt, whether it's for things that you have zero control over or little control over, or mistakes that you were made when you were in a state that was just so far removed from what you were used to, you got to let it go. Apologize. Let them know how sorry you are, but then you've got to leave it. You've got to leave it because otherwise, this is especially true with clinical depression. if you hold on to the guilt, it will feed the depression. I promise you. And you'll get worse and worse. It will get worse and worse. And pretty soon, as I've mentioned in many of my other videos, you feel like you're dead. You feel like you're emotionally dead, like your soul has been stolen. So you don't want to feed the guilt. You want to, in both of these, with both of these types of guilt, the way to overcome it is by getting better. And as you get better, leave the guilt behind and use your positive action to deal with that guilt. So as soon as things are going better, do the things that you didn't do before. Be a good husband, be a good father, be a good mother, be a good wife. When you do that, not only will the person be so grateful that they've gotten the person they love back, but it'll also give you things to feel good about. And it'll help overcome any guilt that you may have for months or years that you lost to a condition that's really insidious, right? Anxiety and depression, it's not something you can see or touch, but it's real. It's as real, it's as real as the wind. It's as real as cancer. It's as real as a broken bone. And it's very difficult to deal with. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. Again, get treated and start recovering. That'll be the best way to get over the guilt. But then, again, use your logical mind and assess. If you want to look at how much blame to assess yourself, imagine it was somebody you cared about who went through what you've gone through. How judgmental would you be? How long would you be mad at them for? We're completely irrational when it comes to, blaming ourselves. And some people, they never accept blame for anything. They view it as weakness. Personally, I believe that accepting blame is actually a good quality for a leader, but not dwelling on it, not feeling guilt and never moving past it. That will end up being a character flaw that will keep us stuck in one place and keep us from ever fully recovering. And that's about all I wanted to say with this video. Don't hang your head because you had a bad stint of time with anxiety and depression. It takes a while to figure out what these conditions are. It takes a while to figure out how to treat them. It takes a while to recover. Once you have, be proud of the fact that you were able to overcome something that a lot of people haven't. Don't hold on to the guilt. And you guys will be surprised. Again, it's the positive action that's going to really lift you out of any guilt that you may have felt about the past. So thanks so much for the engagement, for all of the likes. If you know anybody who's going through any of these anxiety spectrum conditions, have them take a look at the channel. Worst case scenario, maybe they'll at least realize they're not alone. Maybe they'll realize that they do have one of these conditions and they just haven't had it addressed. But I just want people to get the help they need and not waste years of their life. So until my next video, guys, take care.